Eli Brooks spent years hearing whispers that he was too weak to be a real rancher ever since James Halloway took his family's land when he was just 19. Halloway's smug taunts at the town fair were the last straw, echoing the arrogance of a man who thought strength was measured only by size. But fate, and Eli's quiet, relentless preparation, had a surprise in store that no one in Flat Creek saw coming. And just wait until you hear how one unforgettable moment turned those whispers into applause, and why justice at last had the final word. The annual autumn fair in Flat Creek was the kind of event that pulled the whole town into one place. Stalls lined the dirt path like a parade of colors. Fresh pies cooling on checkered cloths, jars of honey glinting in the sunlight, and prize roosters crowing from wicker cages. The air was a mix of cinnamon, hay, and the faint, sharp scent of livestock. People came for the food and games, but they stayed for the stories, because at the fair, someone was always talking about someone else. That morning, the chatter turned toward a man most of them had only seen from a distance. Eli Brooks walked slowly through the main lane, boots kicking up little spirals of dust that shimmered in the bright light. He carried himself without hurry, his long frame almost too lean for the broad-shouldered world of Flat Creek's ranchers. The shirt on his back was clean but worn, its fabric softened from years of washing, and his hat brim sagged slightly on one side. His hands, though, told a different story, knotted with calluses, steady in their movements, as if they knew more work than his build suggested. He reached the livestock pens where his bull waited, a broad-chested creature with a calm gaze and a coat the color of dark molasses. A small crowd had gathered nearby, leaning on the rails, hats tipped forward. Among them stood James Halloway, the man who owned more land than anyone in the county and whose voice carried like a church bell. "Well now," Halloway drawled, loud enough for everyone within 30 feet to hear. "That your bull, Brooks? Looks like you might need help just lifting a feed bucket for him." The laughter came quick. A few folks covered their mouths, others let it roll out openly. It wasn't mean in the way a fight is mean. It was the easy kind, the sort people think won't leave a mark. Eli didn't move at first. He let the moment hang, one hand resting lightly on the weathered wooden fence. His eyes moved slowly from face to face, taking in each smirk, each sideways glance. Then, with a small tilt of his head, he pushed back the brim of his hat and spoke in a voice that was calm enough to cut through the noise. "Don't worry yourself, Mr. Halloway. I can carry what needs carrying." Something in the evenness of those words made the laughter falter. Eli didn't wait for a reply. He turned back toward his bull, adjusting the rope lead with quiet precision, his movements so sure it was as if no one had spoken at all. But as he walked away, the whispers started up again, softer this time, riding the wind like dry leaves. They didn't know it yet, but in a town where reputation meant everything, Eli Brooks had just taken the first step toward changing his. Flat Creek had a way of holding on to a story. The fair was over, but the echoes of that morning still drifted through the diner, the feed store, and the front porch of the hardware shop. People spoke of Eli Brooks in the same way they talked about the weather, casually, but with just enough edge to mean something. Most of the talk wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than that. It was the kind of polite doubt that can follow a man for years. At the Rusty Spur, the town's only bar, someone would raise a glass and ask if Eli had found a smaller bull to practice on. At the market, a couple of ranch hands would glance over their shoulders and trade grins as he loaded his supplies. No one shouted at him in anger. No one tried to run him off, but their smirks and sidelong looks told him they didn't expect much from the skinny rancher with the quiet voice. Eli never answered them. He simply went home. His land lay a few miles out of town, past wind-leaned fence posts and a dry creek bed where cottonwoods clung to what little shade they could find. His ranch house was small, paint sun-faded, but the barn was solid, and the corral held the heart of his work, a few head of cattle, including the bull he'd brought to the fair. Each morning before the sun cleared the horizon, Eli was already moving. He hauled 50-pound feed sacks across the yard, stacked them neatly in the shed. He filled barrels with water from the pump, rolling them across uneven ground. At first, he strained under the weight, his boots slipping in the dust. But each day, his pace grew steadier. The air filled with the thud of hay bales hitting the ground, the scrape of boots against earth, the grunt of effort swallowed by the wide, empty fields. This wasn't training for the sake of pride alone. 3 years earlier, when his father passed, the Brooks family ranch was deep in debt. James Halloway had offered to help, buying the land at a price that cleared the bank, but left Eli's mother with barely enough to keep the house. Eli had been 19 then, too young, too unprepared to fight for what was theirs. The humiliation of watching Halloway ride away with their cattle and claim their pasture had never left him. Now, when the wind blew through the open barn doors carrying the dry, gritty scent of dust, Eli would grip the rope lead of his bull and walk the perimeter of the corral again and again. Step, breathe, step, breathe. In his mind, each lap was one more layer of steel in the frame he was building. Not just in his back and legs, but in his resolve. The town still saw a thin man with a polite nod, but the land, the cattle, and the quiet mornings knew better. They could feel the shift, the way the air changes before a storm. Spring in Flat Creek had a way of drawing people outdoors. The fields turned green. The river swelled just enough to carry a steady song, and the townsfolk looked for any excuse to gather. That excuse came in the form of the Spring Festival, a mix of music, food, and contests that filled Main Street from the old post office all the way to the open pasture behind the church. Eli Brooks had skipped most festivals since moving on to his small patch of land. But this year, one event pulled him in, the test of the rancher. It was part skill, part showmanship, and all pride. The challenge was simple on paper. Move a bull from one pen to another without tools, vehicles, or help. The distance wasn't far, but the animal's weight could crush any thought of success for the unprepared. By mid-morning, the pasture was ringed with people. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Vendors sold lemonade from wooden stands, and the smell of grilled corn drifted in the breeze. At the center, the arena had been marked with rope lines, the ground inside raked smooth. James Halloway was there early, his hat tipped low, chatting with other ranch owners as if the outcome was already decided. His nephew, a broad-shouldered man named Clay, was set to compete. The unspoken expectation was that Clay would win easily. He had the size, the strength, and the family name. When Eli stepped into the arena, a hush fell for just a moment, then the low ripple of voices began. He wore the same worn shirt from the autumn fair, sleeves rolled, hat brim shadowing his eyes. At his side stood Iron, his massive one, 500-pound bull, head lowered, muscles shifting under a dark, glossy coat. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice said, "That's him, the skinny one from the fair." The announcer read the rules, his voice carrying over the murmur of the audience. No prodding, no pulling. The rancher had to guide or carry the bull into the far pen. It sounded impossible, and in most cases it was. Clay went first. He tried pushing, coaxing, even leaning his full weight against the bull's side. The animal shifted a few feet but refused to budge further. The crowd clapped politely, but there was no spark in the applause. Then it was Eli's turn. He stepped toward Iron, resting one hand gently against the bull's neck. He stood there for a moment, silent, as if they were the only two in the arena. A gust of wind carried the scent of dust and trampled grass across the field. Eli's jaw tightened. Some people leaned in to see what he would do. Others shook their heads, certain the contest was over before it began. But in that stillness, there was a wait. The kind that comes just before something shifts, before the moment that will be remembered long after the ropes are taken down and the crowd goes home. The air in the arena felt heavier now, as if the whole field had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Eli stood beside Iron, the bull's steady breathing sending faint ripples through the dust at their feet. The animal's dark eyes flicked toward him, calm but alert, as if sensing something unusual. Eli didn't rush. He ran his palm slowly along Iron's neck, grounding himself, feeling the warmth and the rhythm of the massive heart beneath his hand. Beyond the rope line, the crowd leaned in. No one spoke. Even the restless shuffle of boots had gone still. Then Eli crouched, sliding his arms into position beneath the bull's chest. His boots dug into the soil, heels carving deep marks as he braced. Muscles along his back and shoulders tensed like coiled rope about to snap. At first, there was no movement, only the faint creak of the rope fence as someone leaned too far forward. And then, he began to rise. Iron shifted, surprised by the lift, but Eli adjusted, balancing the weight with practiced precision. A sharp gasp cut through the quiet, followed by murmurs that swelled like a low tide. The sight was impossible to ignore. The wiry rancher, his frame rigid with effort, carrying a 500-pound bull, as if the years of whispers had been nothing more than fuel for this moment. Step by step, he moved forward. Each stride sent small clouds of dust swirling in the sunlight, catching gold in the air. The bull's hooves brushed the ground lightly, but the burden was Eli's alone. His breath came slow, controlled, the kind of focus that left no space for doubt. Somewhere near the fence, a voice broke through. "He's gonna make it." Others joined in, the murmurs turning to cheers that rose with every step. Faces that had worn smirks in the autumn now stared wide-eyed, as if the shape of the man before them had changed entirely. When Eli reached the far pen, he lowered Iron with a care that looked almost ceremonial, easing the bull back onto solid ground without a jolt. He straightened, rolling his shoulders once, and tipped the brim of his hat forward. For a breath, there was only silence, the stunned kind that holds for a single weightless second. Then the noise came, a flood of applause and calls that rolled over the arena like thunder. On the far side, James Halloway stood motionless. His hands were still in his pockets, but the familiar easy grin had vanished. Eli met his eyes just long enough to make the point without a single word. Then he turned and led Iron out through the gate, dust trailing behind them like a signature in the air. That was the moment the town's story about the skinny rancher ended, and a new one began. The roar of applause still echoed faintly in Eli's mind as he and Iron stepped beyond the arena ropes. Each stride took them farther from the churned earth and the clamor of the crowd, into open pasture where the air felt lighter. The breeze here was cooler, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Iron walked at his side without tugging or slowing, his movements steady, almost dignified, as if he too understood that something had shifted. By the time they reached the barn, a small gathering had formed near the fence. Some were neighbors Eli had only ever nodded to at the market. Others were seasoned ranchers, who had once spoken of him as if he barely belonged in their world. Now, their hats were in their hands, their postures straighter. One man in a faded denim jacket stepped forward. "Didn't think you had it in you," he admitted, his voice carrying no mockery, only a quiet respect. Eli's answer was simple and calm. "Guess so." By sundown, the story was running the length of Flat Creek. At the cafe, it was told over coffee and pie. In the feed store, it grew more detailed with every retelling. And out on the far ranches, it already had the rhythm of a legend. Even James Halloway, when their paths crossed days later, offered only a slow, deliberate tip of his hat. No smirk, no comment. And for Eli, that was enough. Life went on as it always had. The days were still long, the fences still sagged in places, and the cattle still needed tending before sunrise. But now, the work carried a different weight. People spoke to him with a tone they hadn't used before. No quiet jokes behind his back, no second glances measuring him against their doubts. Just the steady acknowledgement that comes when a man has proven himself beyond question. One warm evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields in golden rust, Eli leaned against the fence and watched Iron graze in the fading light. The air was still except for the slow rhythm of the bull's chewing and the distant call of a meadowlark. In that moment, Eli understood something. What happened in the arena had never really been about Halloway, or the crowd, or even the years of whispered doubt. It was about proving something to the 19-year-old who had once stood powerless while his family's land was signed away. That boy had needed to see that one day he would be strong enough to stand his ground. In Flat Creek, the story would live far longer than the dust in the arena. It would be told on front porches, over card games, and during quiet nights at the Rusty Spur. Not as a tale of a man underestimated, but as one of a man who carried far more than a bull that day. And as the first stars pierced the darkening sky, Eli tipped his hat back, letting the quiet settle around him. The storm had passed, the work would go on, but now the work was his, and so was the respect.